said to no born away. But I am not born away. What your master's on them. And I said to no born away. I could my born away. I said to no born away. Ubakuni kancheni na born away. From my head. No born away. Ubakuni kancheni na born away. And I've got to buy no born away. I from my head. Born away. What your master's on them. Ubakuni kancheni na born away. As I'm working so set to travel in home. Una di ko shabaka same. Opim so. You know you can find out. I would depend on your bed. You never have him there. Tete bwan kuma una kon fire kwam uhim kin sanda
boy no catch head no was a head. Me nua ya asem atunu ni o. Say ya me na me eto me anka da me bi kran ka mawu. Wo bia onye ni kuno hwe. Wa wo peche hye dem. Ya kwanya wade na afaso. Say ya me na to me a anka mawu. Enti me sira mo ma onye ne sika. Mo je ne wa siri kura wonya. Na headmaster ne se ne ya te. No mo chochoro me mani din. Na omudi omwura mu. Enti aka omu teburu no mu kunya kra. Me nya nto ma wo mu. Ene omu kọ. Omukọ nkakra saa. Omukọ nkakra saa. De bia ade ba chi no mu ba ko school am yam de me pram. Ade ba chi no mu ba kwa omukọ ba ombedi anwumire o ma sa bedi.
Enota.
Na me yam
Unya adwuma.
Me ya adwuma. Me for before so ase na makoyiyi.
Se wo ye wadwen se wo be wo kwada mako 5 a. I was so me on pay we mu. What in me chona say? Me say we live in a crazy world. Can it no? Se na ne ya papa no mtie na enne mako esisim engugum. Ti se wo se eja na ba no. Na wada wo so. What wo mako 5. Uso adwuma nkoyie ade me chi ni akwada akomde no. Akwada ko school ni school fees kwant me nchia afa ni yekopa masa me sel twomudin kakra ma me ne bus ko won't me to ne ne mfa so wa wo dodo mu no ane de we he na wokuta ba ko na ntinka force
Majesty at the British Museum last year, and I would like to thank the recent collaboration on the exhibition in Kumasi and this lecture are the first results of this new phase in our relationship, and we look forward to continuing this partnership with new projects. Today, the British Museum is firmly committed to building productive lecture. Otumfuo, Nananum, my lords, ladies and gentlemen. I think well, the British cabinet that approved the return of Nana Krempe I to Asante in 1924, including my great-grandfather, Lord Palmer. Another family is represented whose ancestor was an important figure in the history of constructive relations between England and Asante. Because Thomas Edward Bowditch, whose descendants are with us here, visited the Asantehene Nana Bonsu in 1817 and 18, bringing back a treaty of perpetual peace and harmony for Anglo-Asante relations on the Gold Coast. And his book, Mission from Cape Coast Castle to Ashanti, is one of the earliest extended accounts by a European of life at the Asante court. People sometimes focus on the 5 Anglo-Asante wars of the 19th century, but between the end of the first, which settled the southern boundary of Asante at the Prau River in 18 that we are recognizing, which occurred in the first of these wars. Sorry, in the third of these wars. For this year is the 150th anniversary of the ending of the third Anglo-Asante war. Centre, the Abai, that Nana Bonsu had created, inspired. Brass blunderbusses, prints from illustrated newspapers, and among much else, copies of the Times of London. So some of what will be going back now was taken then. But recall by British government, including my great-grandfather as Secretary of Colonies. I'm sorry, It was the government before that, so it was the one with my great-grandfather, who was labelled leader of the House of Lords. That return initiated a period of peace and progress in Asante that continues to this day. My sisters and I grew up in Kumasi, the Kumasi of Nana Prempeh II. One of my happiest childhood memories is growing up to the palace after church on Sundays to sit with my mother on a veranda shaded with vines and wait restored after Nana Prempeh's predecessor returned from exile, a building that was replaced with a new modern palace after my father's brother-in-law, Atumfuo Nana Bokwe II, succeeded Nana Prempeh as Asantehene. That building is now home to the museum, whose contents will be enriched by these objects that will be returning from this museum and the Victorian Albert Museum, and that's something very much celebrated today. And we should all be grateful to Ivor Edgeman and Malcolm Cloud, old friend of Asante, and once keeper of ethnography here at the British Museum, for successfully negotiating this happy outcome. The Kumasi of Nana Prempeh II was a wonderfully cosmopolitan city. There were people there from all regions of Ghana and most of West Africa, speaking all the languages of Ghana and the region. Our main commercial thoroughfare was called Kingsway Street, though it's now Prempeh II Avenue, and in the 1960s, if you wandered down it towards the railway yards at the centre of town, you would pass by Babu's Bazaar, mother about the troubles of his native Lebanon. There were other strangers among us too. In the military barracks in the centre of town, you could find many northerners, faces etched in distinctive patterns of ethnic scarification. And then there were Europeans, a Greek architect, a Hungarian artist, an Irish doctor, a Scottish engineer, a French lady who taught us our language, English barristers and judges, and a wildly international assortment of professors at the university from every continent. Kumasi grew from war, but it has flourished now with these many years of peace. Its university, built on land given to it by Nana Prempeh II, on whose campus I went to primary school, is now one of the great scientific universities of Africa. So I would like to thank Asante on behalf of my sisters and myself for the pleasure and privilege of having grown up in your wonderful city, sir. And indeed, the third and most joyful anniversary we celebrate today is the Silver Jubilee of your installation, sir, as the 16th Asantehene. Your late mother, the magnificent Queen Mother of Asante, was one of my mother's very good friends. Whenever we visited her, my mother would greet her in a very English way, I'm afraid, with a kiss on the cheek. And so your mother used to joke when my mother arrived, my husband has come. So I heard talk of you, sir, from your proud mother long before you were sent to Colton School. It would take too long even to summarise the many achievements of your reign, but you have done so much to modernise a centuries-old kingdom while keeping faithful to our traditions. And I'd like to end, if you will permit me, sir, by picking out just 3 representative achievements that reflect the way you have continued our traditions while modernising the monarchy. The first of these is your commitment to securing our natural environment. Lake Osumtree is one of the most extraordinary elements of the Asante landscape, a meteoric crater that is filled with water over the million years since it was created by an asteroid. You, sir, have led a project to plant 2.5 million trees around the lake, a place I know well because it was my father's parliamentary constituency in the 1950s. A second emblematic achievement of your reign has been the creation of the Atumfuo II Charity Foundation that focuses on 2 themes of your administration: the education of Asante's children, our most precious asset, and the health of the people of Asante. But finally, sir, we should esteem you for your commitment to the process we are participating in today, your determined concern to honour Asante's extraordinary cultural heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, Nananum, please welcome His Royal Highness Atumfuo Nana Osei to Ababio, the 16th Asantehene. radio pele pele ko di fata blofo sencho di fata ni radio pele pele ko di fata blofo sencho di fata ni o kulu beta blofo mo champo funge o kulu beta blofo mo champo funge o sa di fo kunya gwasinge o sa di fo kunya gwasinge o plaza tinadwe kasange o plaza tinadwe kasange o kulu beta blofo de me fa kunya gwasinge chamera come here you followed what they were saying because when you were doing your introduction I realized that you were on top of what's happening in Kumasi and Accra before you know. It is barely 8 weeks since I welcomed to our palace in Kumasi the directors of the British Museum and the Victoria and Albert Museum, who had travelled down to formally hand over a cache of traditional artifacts the museums had loaned to our Meshia Museum. The artifacts, as the world knows, were part of a huge stock looted from the palace of my great-granduncle during the invasion of Kumasi by the British troops in 1874, and their return was a culmination of years of careful negotiations between us and the two great museums. The return of the artifacts had been timed to commemorate the silver jubilee of our reign as the 16th occupant of the Golden Stool. It was an important objective for us, given the growing bonds of friendship between our peoples, to find a pathway through the logjam in the global conversation about the restitution of cultural artifacts extracted from various centers in wholly unethical circumstances during the epoch of global colonial enterprise, and to demonstrate that with sincerity, mutual trust, and goodwill, the world can overcome any impediments to the rational resolution of all conflicting goals. The response of my people to the return of these artifacts has been truly reassuring. The return is being celebrated at one level with the same reverence as the heroes of a state returning from enforced exile, and at another level as marking the spiritual reconnection with lost souls. Critically for me, it has spread among the young not just a new model of self-belief and confidence in their heritage, but an inspiration to strive to add to that heritage of excellence in creativity and innovation. There could not be a more appropriate moment for this than the period when the minds were focused on celebrating the important landmark in our advancing history. The response of our people has added to our great pleasure in accepting the joint invitation of the British Museum and the Victoria and Albert Museum to deliver the memorial lecture on Asante heritage, past and present. It is a pleasure to see among today's distinguished audience some of the eminent historians and anthropologists, like my very good friend, Professor Malcolm MacLeod, who had only express our deepest appreciation for the sincerity of the endeavor in capturing the essence of our heritage to a skeptical world. But our debt to MacLeod is even greater for his readiness to join my grandson Ivo Ajimendua to negotiate with the museums on behalf of the colleagues such as Albert Adubuahin, J. Kwabran Ketia, Alex Atayao Chamatin, William Tordorf, and Kwame Ahin. One has to concede to the relative paucity of literature in our heritage. This is a surprising deficit considering the encyclopedic range of Asante folklore, the culture of storytelling around the fireside, and the monumental compendium of proverbs with which our heritage is enriched. Chinua Achebe reminds us that in much of African culture, proverbs are the palm oil with which words are eaten. To the unlettered in West African culinary arts, this is one of the favorite edible vegetables, almost sacred. Or to quote an authority closer to some of you, Francis Bacon proclaims that the genuine wit and spirit of a nation are discovered by their proverbs. At the risk of appearing to over-egg the pudding, one could find in the Anansi stories a mini Shakespearean experience in wit and wisdom and complexity in storytelling. And yet, we have only the example of the mother of our chairman today, Peggy Sapia, who has endeavored to add the inimitable Anansi to the literature of our times. Equally, one sees little of the proverbs distilled from the pot of wisdom of our forefathers. Thus, literature deficit notwithstanding, Asante heritage, which we inherit with pride, is a tapestry of golden formulations embracing a system of governance consecrated through the fairness of time, loyalty to our traditions, respect for laws, and an unfailing fidelity to the values that define us. In the tradition of Asante, there's no disconnect between the past and the present. The present is continuous from the past as the future is shaped by the present. And so we walk with unfailing respect for the past, confidence in the present, and ebullience in the future. To fully appreciate the essence of this heritage, we need to step back in time to the foundations of our state. The Asante state was a creative response to the imperative of warfare in a particularly dangerous period in history. The coming together of smaller states, sharing a common language, to forge a union capable of defending their independence and advancing their well-being was an act of immeasurable creativity and statecraft. If, as we are told in history, the specifics of place and period are critical, then we should not forget that my great-great-granduncle Opim Soseti and his advisor, Okomfanoche, were creating deep in the first zone of West Africa a union of states of real consequence during the same epoch when the Federalists and Confederates were struggling to create the Federal Union, which is the United States of America. The convergence of these objectives within the same epoch in time, I would suggest, deserves historical acknowledgement. The power of the alphabet, which is writing and reading, had not yet penetrated the forest zone, and none of the chiefs gathered together had received any form of external education which would have influenced their thinking. It therefore speaks to their innate wisdom and creativity in embarking upon this exercise in nation building, and yet the union state they created, with a monarch at the apex and the golden stool at the unifying emblem, has endured through all the changing times to this day in our own reign. It has been adaptable to the political evolution of our time without losing its essence. Understandably, our initial encounters with Britain were far from friendly. We were a fiercely confident African nation determined to preserve its independence, with the freedom to trade with whosoever was willing to trade with us. Our ambitions were obviously at odds with the imperial interests of the colonial enterprise, and the clash of interests inevitably smeared our early encounters in blood through 5 debilitating wars in which both sides lost several thousand lives. In the end, the realism of power determined the direction of history, and the proud Asante became another number in the bargain list of colonial conquests. But even after the far from happy beginnings, structures of the Union state as conceived by our founding fathers. So through the years of colonial rule, through the storms of pre-independence struggle to the revolutionary challenges of recent history, the institution, the Asante state, as structured by our forefathers, has remained as resilient as ever. Thankfully, It is not only the people of Asante who are the devotees of chieftaincy. They probably may be the greater believers, but there's no part of Ghana where chiefs, as traditional leaders, do not have a sway. As a result, the people of Ghana have fashioned a constitution which has wisely bolted the institution of chieftaincy onto the institutions of the modern democratic state. So we are able to serve the national interest as a steadying hand in troubled circumstances, a glue for national cohesion, and a dependable channel for conflict resolution and the preservation of peace. Central to the enduring system has been the unbroken confidence of the people of Asante in their monarch and in the chiefs constituting the traditional state. In Asante etymology, Tete, the past, is a loaded invocation from ancient history and a nod to our beings, our very founding. Our folklore tapestry has hundreds of proverbs associated with it. Two of them, Tete Wobika, the past has something to say, and Tete Wobitre, the past has something to teach, us cross historical times and our cardinal sociology of memory. This respect for our past provides the unbroken thread that keeps the Asante state together. When a chief goes to his village, as we traditionally describe his final journey in life, a stool is consecrated to memorize his reign. He becomes a continuous spiritual presence in the affairs of the state, and successors are required to swear an oath to continue with his good deeds. Without the benefit of the alphabet, during the epoch of the birth of the Asante Union, the soul of the nation, our moral and spiritual values, the ethos of our being, all found expression not in literature, but in our artistic creations, in folklore, in music, and in our irresistible kente cloth. Our chiefs were adorned in them as expression of their leadership, but the artisans were the conveyors of the philosophical underpinnings of our blossoming state. What this tells us is that, for us, the artifacts we speak about are not just some inanimate creations of aesthetic value. They represent our soul. They represent the spirit of our ancestors, the authority of our kings, and the heroes of our past returning in triumph from the battlefield. The evidence of that past in terms of visualization and craftsmanship, whether of religious or interior palace decoration, would be the 1874 and 1896 royal regalia and objects which were looted. Of the 1874 loot, the dazzling ornaments of gold, silver, and brass, described as crown jewels, were sold in the open at and auction houses first in Cape Coast in the Gold Coast before the journey to England within the first quarter of 1874. We are aware that, for example, the famous collector and scientist Sir Henry patrimony that will form part of the British colonial narrative. Of course, artistic creations, folklore, music, and dance are by no means the totality of our heritage. We have noted the heritage of nation building and the system of governance created 400 years ago that has endured to this day. Within the embryo, we see a heritage of valor in battle, loyalty in service, rugged individual enterprise, and feisty diplomatic acumen attuned to the pursuit and preservation of peace. A cursory glance at history will tell us that the first century of military valor saw the expansion of Asante into an empire with influence across much of the territory of Ghana. Asante had become an independent entity with prosperous trading ties that not only with its neighbors but with Europe and the Mediterranean and more. Asante found itself confronting British interests which had taken over colonial outposts of the coastal belt of the Gold Coast from their previous European colonialists. The 1874 invasion of Kumasi, the capital of our flourishing kingdom, by the British military forces, and the subsequent burning of his stone palace, the Aban, which also served as royal residence from the reign of Asante Osebonsu, was to have serious ramifications for both our heritage and historic ties with Britain. The thousands of lives lost, the burning of Kumasi by retreating British forces, the destruction of the palace of Asantehene, and the looting of its contents might well have left wounds that would normally be difficult to heal. The fact that we have overcome the pains of the past speaks to the profound value system compressed into the chalice of our heritage, a mix of steadfastness in defense of our independence and realism and wisdom in the pursuit of peace. The heritage of valor in battle has obscured the fundamental belief of our forefathers, which has guided me through our reign, that the courage to wage wars must be matched at all times by the wisdom to make peace. This belief was made manifest several times in our history. Great-grand-uncle Nana Mensibosu. British diplomats at the time were aghast. They saw the gift of an axe almost as a declaration of war because the axe is a weapon of violence or destruction. But what was the motivation behind the gift? It was a diplomatic symbol of negotiation intended to convey to the empress that in Asante, an axe was used to cut through difficult ends in which Asante lost over 4,000 soldiers with heavy casualties on the British side as well. Most likely, much of what was to follow between us may have been avoided if the message of the golden axe had been grasped. It was quite refreshing, though, that 100 years after that misunderstanding, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth gave permission for this object to be buried for the Asante Kingdom of Gold exhibition at the same museum. Later in 1896, my grand-uncle Ajman Prempe I opted to sacrifice his own freedom to avoid another war. Prempe was facing realism, unlike the British. He was not going to risk the lives of his gallant forces around him. The consequence was his exile from his people for 3 years within the coast of the Gold Coast and to Freetown, and finally to the island of Seychelles, where he was held for 25 years. When King Prempe was finally allowed to return to his people, his message was to heal the wounds and bury the horrors of the past. Asante and Britain bound together, and realism demands that we forge a future of peace and harmony together. Asante had been integrated into the Gold Coast, now the Republic of Ghana, and the new reality, that message and that commitment was critical for the maintenance of cohesion and orderly progress. It has remained critical through the evolution of our new policy and has become the bedrock on which our relationship has been shaped. It is important to acknowledge the extraordinary vision and sacred of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth in the process of creating a propitious environment for healing the past and constructing a new structure based on trust and mutual respect. Britain's second Elizabethan era changed the dynamics of post-imperial Britain's relations, and I'm proud to see it continue and to flourish. It has been our honor and pride to raise upon these foundations as a structure of enduring friendship in this mutual interest of our people. Needless to say, it is in this way that we have entered into the agreement that have allowed us to receive some of our artifacts back. As we have alluded to, it has not been an instant deal. Believe it or not, it has stretched well over 50 years. In 1946, my uncle, like Grandpapa II, made similar appeals and entered into some levels of negotiations, all of which fell apart. At that time, the Gold Coast was agog with anti-colonial fervor, and even though he had been given a knighthood in recognition of his leadership, there was no progress on his way to have the items back in Kumasi. I presume the colonial authorities had more pressing issues on their hands than the fate of what may have been perceived as some inconsequential tribal objects. My brother Otunfo Pokwa is the second who succeeded our uncle's house. My brother II continued with this quest and even held a major exhibition in collaboration with the British Museum in 1982, Asante Kingdom of Gold, which was jointly opened by him and the Duke of Gloucester. It traveled to the American Museum of Natural History in New York the same year. That formal cooperation with this museum as inherited has been on for 50 years, and the ultimate issue, the restitution of cultural objects, has become an issue of global concern with legitimate claims from several countries. The UNESCO had made it a priority. It is no longer disputed that many cultural objects were either looted or extracted from Africa and other colonial zones illegally. But even while in the world already wobbling in a myriad of political miscalculations, we cannot afford to allow this to fester beyond control. We chose the path of silent diplomacy, believing that with trust and sincerity of purpose, we could navigate the maze and find a way that brings us to the point of mutual satisfaction. When we seriously engaged with the two museums, I set my team a target to make sure my people would see their stolen ornaments back in Kumasi for the silver jubilee of our reign. I'm proud we achieved this, and a number of our prize ornaments are now resting in our resolution. In days gone by, our nations needed brave hearts to win wars. Today, we need great minds to win souls. Our brave warriors knew how to navigate through the dense forest to engage and overcome enemies. We now need our great minds to navigate the dense fog of problems to win friends. That is the new Asante reality. It remains our unalterable position that articles of cultural importance looted or procured in unethical circumstances through the colonial enterprise must be restored to their origins. This is the position of UNESCO and the position clearly endorsed by the government of France. We are mindful of some residual resistance, but in the main, we will contend that all of us in this room are victims of a system in need of updating. We are either victims of a system that denies us justice or victims of a system that prevents us from administering justice and doing what we know to be the right thing. From both sides, we need with sincerity to appeal to our conscience. Nobody disputes the fact that much of the cultural objects at issue were obtained in illegal or unethical circumstances. Can anyone in good conscience sustain the enactment of a law to protect illegality? That has to be a monumental challenge to jurisprudence, and I can say a challenge to what I unshakably believe to the British justice. My sincere hope is that in the fullness of time, sooner than later, state authorities will take steps to review laws contrived to protect illegalities and permit all concerned to apply themselves to the rational resolution of the challenge of restitution. I stand ready in the spirit of international harmony to invite the world to Kumasi for a global conference to seek universal consensus on the peaceful and rational restitution of illegally procured cultural objects. It is a fact that we had to replace the looted ornaments to be able to continue with the spiritual and traditional rights they were created for. The new ones were made by the Ajunfo, the Rai artisans who continued their artistic obligations in the 1900s. The Janchemche ceremonial cap, which was made centuries ago, of antelope hide with gold ornaments, and the Mpomposio sword of lost was cast in gold, which was taken from the Kumasi Palace in 1895-96, have been with the British Museum for over a century and have until recently. But even with their replacements that have allowed us to continue with their spiritual and varied roles, the return of the original objects had to be celebrated as a liberation of the soul from captivity. I have alluded to the heritage of individual enterprise in Asante history. It is not always appreciated, even by our historians, that the driving force behind the expansion of Asante Empire was trade. Asante was a major hub for gold trade, whose route extended from the forest to the Sahel. Through trade, we made contact with Islam, which had its own compass. When Asante was eventually integrated into the Gold Coast, a sizable crop of men, of immense entrepreneurial acumen, was on hand to set off a burst of private enterprise. They became the dominant force in cocoa production, which was to become the mainstay of the economy of the Gold Coast. That culture of enterprise has not receded. It is the beacon of private enterprise and the driving force in Ghana's economic development. Along with the heritage of individual enterprise, Asantes have added a culture of traveling, which has seen them spread in all corners of the planet. Indeed, nothing can give one greater pleasure than to see one's grandchildren in such eminent circumstances as our own Kwame Anthony Appiah, Bernard Mensah, or Ofioche, the daughter of one of my loyal chiefs now celebrated as the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Ghana. Of course, the outstanding men and women of our heritage who are serving Britain and many other countries in key positions in government as ministers and members of parliament. All these great minds in the diaspora are like a sprinkling of gold dust on the tapestry of Asante heritage. We cherish them and hope the thread never breaks. Between the bubbling captains of private enterprise at home and the flourishing resources in the diaspora, I see a rewarding convergence and the potential for successful collaboration that could inject fresh momentum into the economy of Ghana. In the meantime, I will urge the continued pursuit of collaboration with the museums and advanced cultural institutions, renewed attention to training in the creative arts, and a vigorous effort to expand market opportunities for works of African artists. The quest for restitution should be no reason for closing the market to our artists. On the contrary, it should point to the satellite on the value of African art to museums and collectors for legitimate acquisition. African artists need to be appreciated. They have to be seen to be appreciated, and like all other artists, they can only be seen through museums and galleries. Opening the market to them and expanding the range of opportunities to them should be part of the global conversation. The African genius, the Nigerian Nobel Right in literature, Wole Soyinka, writing under the art in Africa during the period of colonial rule, says, was hardly a match for the factory, whose products began to flood African markets even at the early stages of colonial venture. He was worried of the loss of integrative role of art in normal community development, especially of the Kudo of the Asante, whose creative motives were as is much the case in Africa, symbols of traditional lessons, proverbs, moral counsels, and episodes in history. Heritage, including Soyinka's writing on the Kudu, almost 40 years ago, could get out of fashion and suffer nostalgia, but regenerates itself with patrons going and to replenish the palace collection that are inherited. These days, unlike in the past, clients go with their own designs, whether to the Adinkra symbols or from other societies in West Africa and beyond. Thus, heritage, in whatever form, would be reinterpreted and reinvented. Jump. Long may the regeneration of cultures adapt well to the modern engineering society. It is one nation with many histories, as one historian aptly puts it. Jump. And so, we will conclude this lecture in the context of its beginning. There was the happily shared news which was most manifested when the global media channels announced the return of the objects to Kumasi. Many Ghanaians of different ethnic groups, including those who abhorred the terminology loan, were upbeat. They saw its tangibility as all belonging and also as an intangible aspect of the histories we share. Commentators in other parts of the continent claimed it as well, using ours instead of theirs, in what was seen as a form of heritage recovery, an adjustment of the small scale of empire narrative. When cultural cooperation endures
Your Royal Majesty, we thank you for this really wonderful, enlightening and insightful lecture. Thank you. This has been a really great honour for us, and we very much look forward to hosting you again at the British Museum. And thank you also to Your Majesty's poets and to Professor Appiah for their fitting introductions. It leaves me only to reiterate to you, Your Royal Majesty, our heartfelt congratulations on your Silver Jubilee, and to thank you again for working in partnership with us, and long may that continue. And to all of you here, and via the live stream, thank you very much for taking part in this event, and I wish you all a very pleasant rest of the evening. And now if I could ask all of you to please remain seated until His Royal Majesty departs the lecture theatre. Thank you.
Pray silence for the Right Worshipful, the Lord Mayor Locum Tenens, Alderman the Lord Levine of Port Socal.
Your Excellencies, my Lords, ladies and gentlemen, it's a very great pleasure to welcome you all to Guildhall this evening, where we in the City of London are very proud to host this, the 15th Commonwealth Lecture. The Lord Mayor is very sorry not to be with you himself tonight. He's on a business mission to our Commonwealth partners in Australia and New Zealand. And I know that he would want me to thank the Commonwealth Foundation for all its work in organising this evening's event. The Commonwealth is an extraordinary 2 billion strong family of peoples and nations, bound together by a shared commitment to democracy, good governance, respect for human rights, the eradication of poverty, and sustainable development. All values which events right across the world show we must continue to cherish and to promote. But the Commonwealth is also bound together by a single figure, Her Majesty the Queen, whose Diamond Jubilee we celebrate this year. Her Majesty's life has been one of service and duty, respected by all, a life committed to connecting the diverse peoples of the Commonwealth together. So it's entirely fitting that Commonwealth Observance Day this year marks the start of the Diamond Jubilee celebrations, opened by the UK's largest multi-faith celebration at Westminster Abbey, attended by Her Majesty. And it is just as fitting that the Commonwealth theme for this very special year and our lecture this evening should be that of connecting cultures. We share a great deal, but we celebrate our difference and how much we can learn from our rich diversity. The City of London offers services that will be critical in creating jobs and growth at home and abroad. The City also has a very strong commitment to the arts, not least as one of the largest funders and supporters of the arts in this country. From the Barbican Centre to the museums we support here in the City and right across London. So we're delighted this evening to welcome the Commonwealth Secretary-General, His Excellency Mr. Kamalesh Sharma, to Guildhall this evening, who of course is no stranger to us here at all, as well as our lecturer, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Her novels and short stories have made a huge impact. Facts and figures tell one part of her story, but her work contains the holy grail for all writers, what one critic called emotional truth, showing us the feelings and the dramas of individuals caught up in terrible historic events, confronting us with the human consequences of real events, all done with empathy and grace. Her fellow writer, Chinua Achebe, said, "We do not usually associate wisdom with beginners, but she is a writer endowed with the gift of ancient storytellers." I'm sure that you're all looking forward to a special lecture as part of a very special year. And I would now like to hand over to Simone de Comamond, the Chair of the Commonwealth Foundation. Thank you very much.
My Lord Mayor, Secretary-General Mr. Sharma and Mrs. Sharma, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The Commonwealth Lecture is organized by the Commonwealth Foundation in partnership with the Commonwealth Secretariat, the Cambridge Commonwealth Trust, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, the Royal Commonwealth Society, and the Royal Overseas League. Connecting Cultures is the Commonwealth theme for 2012. It celebrates the diverse mix of people across the Commonwealth, united by shared values and vision. Together, these 54 nations represent over 2 billion people of differing beliefs and traditions, with cultural expression a vibrant means of identity and exchange. The Commonwealth Foundation is the Commonwealth agency which has been entrusted by heads of governments to take care of the culture portfolio, amongst other activities, of course. We recognize that culture is an essential pillar of development. Culture is the soul of our society and an expression of the human spirit. It is intrinsically linked to the fabric of the Commonwealth. Our culture program aims to give less heard voices an opportunity to share their stories. Targeted initiatives develop and support cultural practitioners to challenge and explore issues that affect civil society at every level. And in the year of connecting cultures, we have relaunched the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, won by our speaker in 2005, in the form of Commonwealth Writers, a new global initiative which finds and develops new writers of fiction. In 2011, Commonwealth heads mandated a relaunch of the Commonwealth Foundation so that it can more effectively strengthen and mobilize civil society in support of Commonwealth